Hey kids! Today we're going to talk about the real OG, the original giants, and specifically Og and Gog and Magog and their language. I have come to believe, well really for the last several years, that there was once another hominid race on planet Earth living next to Homo sapiens, and I don't mean Denisovans, I don't mean Gigantopithecus, I don't mean Neanderthal, I don't mean Homo erectus, I mean another race of hominids, humanoids, that are very, very similar to humans, to regular Homo sapiens. Only a few differences. Of course, their stature. These beings were extremely tall. Accounts go anywhere from 6.5 feet all the way up to 18 feet. I have a feeling, based on archaeological evidence and skeletons that have been discovered through history, that the average was somewhere between 9 and 12. 8 and 12 probably. But these accounts are from all over the world. One of the key bits of information we see is 6 fingers and 6 toes on each hand and foot. Sometimes double rows of teeth. These beings are often described as having red or blonde hair, and typically blue or hazel eyes, occasionally green. First, let's talk about King Og of Bashan. Apparently, he had a bed that was 13 feet long and 6 feet wide. King Og of Bashan and the people of Bashan were murdered by the Israelites during Joshua's campaign after he toppled Jericho, went into the land of King Og, and they basically genocided the entire race. This is important. This goes back to Jacob and Esau. This goes back to Cain and Abel. These are two controlling peoples of planet Earth waging war throughout all of history. You have the giants and the Israelites, the Hebrew. There have been accounts of 6-fingered giants all over planet Earth. Every continent except for Antarctica has petroglyphs, cave paintings, rock art with abnormally sized feet next to regular sized feet, and the large feet will have 6 toes, whereas the regular human sized feet, they have a normal arch like a human does, whereas the larger feet are typically flat. But clearly represented on all these petroglyphs and wall art from caves, we see 6 fingers and 6 toes. In the Cave of Forgotten Dreams in LaSalle, France, and in other places in North America, some of the caves around where the Anasazi lived, the Pueblo peoples, we see a 5-fingered handprint on the wall. This isn't just because they were fascinated with the fact that they had 5 fingers, or they liked making Thanksgiving turkeys like you do in elementary school. No, they were showing who this cave belonged to. It belonged to a Homo sapien who had 5 fingers. For some reason, this 6-fingered archetype, the Buddha is presented as having 6 fingers a lot, especially in places like Nepal. In the Bible, these giants are referred to as Nephilim or the Raphaim. In fact, the word Nepal for the country is named after the Nephilim. The original story for Britain, the founding of the British Isles, Ireland and Britain, Great Britain, the United Kingdom. In the original stories, it's claimed that these giants were the original occupiers of this land after the deluge. The story goes like this. There was a Roman emperor who had 33 daughters. They were all pretty bad women. And in order to teach them a lesson, their father, the emperor, picked for them 33 husbands that were pretty despicable as well, so they would kind of get a taste of their own medicine. Well, the head daughter, Alba, she decides to get all her sisters together, and they plot to, as her husbands are sleeping, for them to slit their throats. So they did this, killing all 33 of their husbands, and as punishment they were exiled. They were put on a boat with half a year's worth of rations and sent out to sea. They arrive on the British Isles and take on giant husbands, or sometimes referred to as demonic husbands, and they give birth to a race of giants. The original name for Great Britain or the United Kingdom or England was Albion. Albion was the original name of the British Isles. Albion is named Albion after Alba, the head daughter that led the 33 strong murder spree of her sisters. Apparently, these giants that were born in Albion were formidable warriors. Whenever the Romans came in, they had to fight the giants, and there's a story about a Roman soldier fighting the last giant and defeating him to take over England. His name was Cornelius, not Cornelius, but something very similar to that. That's where they get the word Cornwall from, Cornwall, England. It's named after this fellow who killed Gog Magog, which you might be familiar with from the Bible. In Genesis, one of the descendants of Adam was named Gog, although there was no mention of him having Magog. However, in this British story of the colonization of the English islands by the Romans, accounts Gog and Magog. A lot of people think that Ma just means son of. So you have Gog and then son of Gog. This is important because Gog is spelled G-O-G. Magog is M-A-G-O-G. And this is very similar to King Og of Bashan, O-G. So you have Gog, Magog, and Og. It's interesting because, and I don't know exactly where I stand on this, mind you, but I found this interesting. Whenever I was doing my research on the history of the written language, and I was trying to, just like a scientist would trace the DNA of a person back to, his earliest ancestors, I was trying to trace the root of all these languages, whether it was Hebrew, Proto-Hebrew, Phoenician, Canaanite, Egyptian hieroglyphics, cuneiform. I was trying to trace all these to a common, simple root language. And come to find out that part of the old Irish tale of where they came from, they believed that a race of giants, after the fall of the Tower of Babel, got together and they decided to make a written language that shared traits from all the other languages, something that could be used with hand signs. They eventually make their way up to Ireland, and they make this their racial language. It's called Ogham, O-G-H-A-M, Ogham. It's a simple line that has crosshatches across it. It looks kind of like a zipper almost, but the direction of the slanted lines going across the main vertical axis, the horizontal lines that crisscross it, depending on how many of there are grouped together or which ways they slant, represents one of 20 different letters in the Ogham alphabet. And this is an interesting language because you actually find Ogham carved on cave walls in the eastern United States and eastern Canada. For instance, the Ogham word Grion, which means sun, and a bunch of other words have been found carved in this language all over North America, and especially Ireland. They're typically carved in standing stones, things that are similar to Stonehenge, but carved. Ireland is, I believe, was the metropolis of these beings, these giants. If you want to learn more about them, I recommend watching a presentation on YouTube called Giants on Record. And these two gentlemen, one from Australia and I think the other one's from Boston, they lay out all the different accounts in recorded history of people discovering giant skeletons, especially in the mounds of Ohio. It's very, very common for them to dig up bones of people 8, 10, 12 feet tall. And some of these people are mummified, like the Egyptians. Some of them still have red hair. A lot of times, these digs, or these mound excavations, are picked up by the Smithsonian. They come in, take the bones, and they're never seen again. In 2016, we had the Smithsonian Museum releasing the fact that they had 200 giant skeletons in their possession, but in order to preserve the scientific dogmatic religion of Darwinism, they didn't want to release the fact that they discovered 200 skeletons of people over 8 feet tall, so they just burned them. They destroyed the skeletons to destroy all the evidence, because they didn't want to believe that there was a race that was more formidable than humans living on planet Earth at one time. The Native Americans talk about these giants quite a bit. In fact, in Lovelock Cave, they apparently were tired of these giants cannibalizing them, the Paiute Indians, so they go to the cave where these giants were dwelling, and they light fires all around the entrance of the cave, and they throw in burning branches, and they smoke them to death. Now this cave sat like this, filled with these dead giants, for centuries. And the cave slowly fills up with bat guano. Well, whenever they realized that bat guano was a valuable commodity back in the 1800s, they started excavating this cave, Lovelock Cave, and they found sandals that were 18 inches long. They found things like duck lures, or they even found marijuana pipes that were 8 inches long. Some of the giants they found, they actually took pictures of as well. One of the women was 9 feet tall. This is all covered up. You don't see any evidence of this in museums or anything anymore, just because it's such a taboo topic. But I think it would explain a lot of the megalithic structures we see around the world. Giants are often described as being, like I said, tall, typically blonde, red hair, blue or hazel eyes, sometimes green, double rows of teeth, 6 fingers and 6 toes, but also apparently they have a horrible smell. They just smell like death, like skunks. And they have really high-pitched, squeaky, weird voices that they can make horrible sounds with. People describe this as like a lion's roar, like a frequency that is so low that the human ear can barely register it, but it makes your whole body vibrate. So they had this weird vocalization to them as well. And they were, of course, incredible warriors, and a lot of times they were depicted as cannibals. Well, what's interesting is Bigfoot. I never believed in Bigfoot until a couple of years ago. I always thought it was just a bunch of crackpots. Of course, the Patterson film was always really interesting to me, and you can see breasts on this female Bigfoot. You can see her muscles ripple under her hair. You can see the fact that her head is conical. You can see the fact that her hands hang down lower than a human's would if they were in some kind of monkey costume. It's a very convincing video, but I still didn't believe in Bigfoot until I kind of started piecing things together. In Florida, the native Bigfoot to the Everglades is called the skunk ape because it smells so bad, just like the giants. Also, you hear stories about giants making horribly high-pitched or rumbling sounds that were more than a human can make. I started to realize that maybe these were the descendants of these giants. Maybe the reason that we don't ever see them is because they're extremely intelligent. Maybe they're completely covered in hair now. They were hairy before, but not like Bigfoot. Maybe these are the descendants of the giants. So I started studying plaster casts of Bigfoot footprints, and I found several of them which I believe are accurate footprints, not just dummy feet that some redneck put on and walked around and pretended he was Bigfoot and took some pictures with these big long strides. The ones that I believe are accurate are the ones that have a small, if you imagine this would be your foot and this would be your big toe, there would be a small offshoot down here, a recessive toe that has gotten smaller over the ages. Specifically, I found these in Yeti footprints. Almost every footprint documented by people climbing the Himalayas are six-toed. And that did it for me. I was like, well, if they have 6 toes, and I found this out myself, and I didn't hear this off of a YouTube video. I discovered this myself. And if they share the hairiness, the height, the fact they have large, flat footprints, the fact they have 6 toes, and the fact they have these crazy vocalizations, as well as the fact they smell really bad, these are just too many common points. A lot of people believe that the Bible itself references these giants whenever they're talking about the flood. That the flood was actually caused in order to slay these people because they were so cannibalistic and so war mad that they were causing too much destruction on the face of the earth. They were eating too much, and God, quote-unquote, wanted to wipe them out. In fact, that's why the Tower of Babel was built, because people wanted to get up high in case there was another flood. They wanted to be able to survive, so they wanted to build something very, very tall, that way that God couldn't kill them again in the flood. And the origin of the Ogham language dates all the way back, according to Irish folklore, all the way back to the Tower of Babel and the founding of a common language. I believe these people have lived on planet Earth with us for a long, long time. I believe they were responsible for a lot of the megalithic architecture. The Tibetans believe, and possibly still practice to this day, that the ability to move large stones, statues, or whatever that they typically couldn't move with their strength, by using certain instruments that they play at the same time, a slow, steady blast that begins to resonate and levitate rocks so they can push them in position. What if a lot of these megalithic structures weren't just built by the strength of these giants, but they used their ability to vocalize to find resonant frequencies within rocks so they could through sonic levitation, then move them into place. Maybe they can even change the consistency of certain objects by using their vocalizations to soften rocks, like the rocks we see in Saxy Woman and Puma Punku and Lake Titicaca, all these different places in South America where we see these perfectly cut stones that look like they're almost made out of marshmallows and stuck together in patterns that are almost impossible to cut for a stonemason. Maybe they were able to influence the stones, move them into place, maybe even soften them so they could fit together properly by using sonic powers that they could generate through their vocalizations. Something akin to throat singing. I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent here about giants, but it's something I've always felt very interested in. Even Abraham Lincoln talked about the giants. Abraham Lincoln said, "I'm looking out over Niagara Falls, the same falls that the race of giants who once lived in America and are buried under the Ohio mounds looked on years and years ago." It was pretty common knowledge back in the day that the mound builders were giants. Native Americans have stories about them waging war against these giants with red hair. Sometimes they actually said they had black hair too, and then the red and black haired giants were at war with each other. But you see a lot of copper work in these mounds. Native Americans didn't work with metals very much, but apparently the giants did. So they find copper and tin and bronze implements, and golden and silver as well, that have been worked in a lot of these mounds. Native Americans were not all the red-skinned, dark-haired, beardless Indians that we know of today with pop culture and whatnot. I think a lot of the skeletons that have been hidden away by the Smithsonian or repatriated to the Native Americans probably didn't even look like Native Americans. I imagine most of these people that have been found in the mounds, for instance, were probably Caucasian looking, Irish looking. A very interesting story came out last year about a peat bog in Florida, just like the peat bogs of northern Europe. A lot of the Anglo-Saxon, Celtic, Gothic, Viking people, Germanic people, would bury their dead or sacrifice their dead, or sacrifice their living, turning them dead, and throw them into peat bogs, where they would get sunk into the muck and their bodies would be perfectly preserved. Well, in Florida, they found a whole bunch of people ceremoniously put into this peat bog. Whenever they did DNA testing on them, they were European. These are the oldest bodies of anyone that has been found in North America in these peat bogs, some dating back 9,000 years or more, completely filled with Europeans. People have known about America besides just the people who they think traveled across the Bering Strait, the land bridge, into America back in the day. In fact, if you trace the DNA back, the Denisovan line of Homo sapiens, typically found mostly in Asia, are also found in a bunch of South Americans. Although that gene, the Denisovan genes, aren't found in North American Indians, meaning that these people came across the Pacific Ocean. They didn't go across a land bridge. We've been sailing and navigating this planet for a long, long time. Back before our equator is where it is today. What else do I have to say about giants? This is controversial, and I don't really know if I believe it. The Nazis were obsessed with the Uberman, the Superman, the perfect warrior. The Thule Society starts a program to go around the planet looking for the history of the Aryan race, supposedly. At the same time, you have people like Heinrich Himmler professing that Germanic people descend from a perfect race. And you have people working in labs, in concentration camps, on things like children, twins. One doctor was actually trying to combine, I can't remember his name, he was trying to combine twins together in the womb. I couldn't think of the reason why he was doing this, and then I realized why. It's because they realized that double rows of teeth, and being twice as tall as a regular human, the way that this might happen is by a human consuming another human in vitro to become double human. That's where they get the 2 rows of teeth from. Of course, this is bullshit, but genetic research didn't exist then. They weren't going around the planet. They weren't visiting Tibet and measuring the heads of monks and taking plaster casts of their face to figure out where the Aryans came from. They were looking for the giants. That's what the Aryans were doing. That's what the Nazis were doing. They were looking for this race of giants. This is what led them to Antarctica. This is what led them to Argentina. In fact, the southern area of Argentina is Patagonia. This is where all the Nazis went after World War II to hide. Patagonia. You know what Patagonia means? Bigfoot. Bigfoot. So if you have any Patagonia jackets, it means Bigfoot. And this is named after a tribe of people that, oh man, I can't remember the name of the explorer. Whenever they were sailing around the tip of South America, he documented encountering these giants, 9 feet tall Indians living in Patagonia, a land of giants, big feet. The Nazis were searching for this because they wanted to make a race of superhumans, super soldiers. They believed they descended from these giants, but they had, through mixing their blood with other races, become smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. I believe that genetic research was started so that people could, so that the scientists could recreate through cloning or through mixing up the genes and sticking inside of a regular human woman. They were trying to recreate giants to make them super soldiers. I believe that process is still going on today. They've probably already perfected it, and we probably have walking giants right now. In fact, there's a story about a man in Afghanistan, a Marine, I believe, with his team, that came across a giant in Kandahar. It's called the Kandahar Giant. And this giant jumps out of a cave with a fucking spear and lifts a man up like a shish kebab into the air on his spear. Lifts a full-grown soldier with 100 pounds of gear on him straight up into the air on this, like Vlad the Impaler. And all these men are freaking out, and they start shooting, and they empty all of their guns into him to kill him. Just light him up. They're shooting him the entire time in the chest. He doesn't even act like it's affecting him. They eventually start shooting him in the head, and he dies. Well, whenever they radio it in, it's almost like the military knew what they were going to find and where they were going to find it. They brought back a cargo helicopter, because a regular helicopter could not carry this man. He was apparently 1,200 pounds. More than half of a ton. Apparently smelled to hell. Stunk like a skunk. And he had a wicked voice whenever he came out of that. A voice that, whenever he did his war cry, it made all the soldiers shake in their boots. And of course, we don't hear about this. We don't hear about it on the news. A whistleblower has to come out and tell L.A. Marzulli about it in order for us to get this story. But what do you think they did with that? Let's say that they didn't have any DNA of any giants, even though they have access to the Smithsonian. Let's say that they didn't have any DNA until the early 2000s, whenever they killed this giant in Kandahar. We would already have 10-year-old giants growing in a laboratory somewhere, because no military worth their salt would allow the DNA of a 12-foot-tall warrior race to disappear from planet Earth. They would clone it. If you don't think that humans have been cloning other humans and animal-human hybrids and these giants since before we even heard about Dolly the sheep being cloned, then you're out of your fucking mind. The Nazis were working on this in the 30s and have continued to work on this. I believe that the tall Nordic aliens, the blonde, tall aliens that we hear so many stories about, especially from Europe, I believe these are just Nazi giants that have been bred as super soldiers and given the task to talk to people like Billy Myers so that they could pretend to be aliens. For what agenda, I don't know. I speculate that they'll show up at the end of a war and pretend to be the Space Brothers from the Galactic Federation, and they'll say, hey guys, just lay down your weapons, let's all work together, we'll help you get started. Us humanoid-looking aliens, we're real friendly and nice, and really it's just going to be the Nazis winning World War II. They're just going to be taking over the planet. I think this is their end game. But it's all because of the giants. It's all because of Og, Magog, Gog, Ogum, and it goes back to well before 12,800 years ago with the end of the Ice Age. It started years and years and years ago. I think a lot of conspiracy theories can be ironed out just with this understanding. Whether it's megalithic statues or underwater pyramids or the pyramids in general, these beings were extremely intelligent, extremely capable warriors, men of legend, warriors of renown. I thoroughly believe these beings lived on planet Earth next to us and probably still live on planet Earth next to us in the form of the Sasquatch, the Yeti, the Abominable Snowman, the Skunk Ape, etc., etc. Well, those are just some of my thoughts. Like and share this video if you want to, I don't care. Definitely subscribe if you haven't already. And I'm going to leave my PayPal link in the description of this video. On a separate note, I am starting my career as a stand-up comedian. I know, I was so funny, right? And it's going to be financially difficult, so if you want to leave me a donation, I plan on putting my stand-up videos online as they get more laughs. I've only got about 15 minutes worth of material right now. I've only been working on it for a couple months, really about a month and a half. My stand-up name is going to be Eric Esot, E-S-O-T. Why? Because if you take that last name, put it in front of the first name, it's esoteric. I thought it was pretty funny. But yeah, that's going to be my stage name. I'm going to start putting material online. So please subscribe, spread me around. I'll put my videos up. If you have any extra cash you want to donate to this poor motherfucker, please do. Like I said, my PayPal link will be in the description of this video. I appreciate all you guys watching. You guys have a wonderful day. Please do a little bit of research and let me know what you think.